Welcome to Opinion Journal. I'm Mary Kissel. You're looking at a live shot of London in their afternoon today. Former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, and one of the 20th century's truly greatest leaders, passed away this morning at the age of 87. We're going to reflect on her life and legacy, starting with editorial page editor Paul Gigot. Paul, there's much to discuss. Let's start with the big picture. What was, in your mind, her greatest legacies?
Well, I think she was the most consequential British Prime Minister of the 20th century, other than Churchill. You could argue that she was much more consequential on domestic policy than Churchill was. I would argue that she might have been comparable on domestic policy to what Churchill was on foreign policy. That is, she helped to reclaim the British economy, British sort of sense of self, of nationhood and optimism coming out of just a horrible period.
Well, reclaim, she practically resurrected it. Is it possible to understand how much she did for the British economy without understanding just what a dire state it was in the 1970s?
No, I think you have to start there. It was really, Britain hadn't really been prosperous, all that prosperous since the end of World War II. And it got particularly worse in the 70s. You had strikes everywhere, trade union dominance, and not the kind of more gentle unions where these were Stalinist unions. I mean, in some cases, they literally tried to loot whole industries. They came out of a real socialist, redistributionist mentality. You had inflation that was double digits. You had tax rates in the 80%. You had slow growth, high prices. Government owned a huge swath of industry. And that had all overall led to a sense of falling opportunity, slow growth, debt, accumulating debt, and she revitalized all that.
And so how did she revitalize it? What were the steps that she took in the labor market or in the monetary sphere?
Well, she ended up using a series of steps to break the back of the unions rather than one giant bill. She did it incrementally, industry by industry, making the case. She privatized huge swaths of British industry, which became, frankly, a lesson for not just the United States, but much of the rest of the world. Paul Johnson says something like 50 countries imitated her privatization schemes, where they took British Airways and British Steel out of public hands, put it into private hands where it could face the forces of competition. She cut tax rates across the board. She tried to revitalize the welfare state. Well, not revitalize it, but she tried to reduce it
right.
by making it respond more to incentives. Probably less successful on that than on some other things, but she succeeded on so many grounds.
Paul, she was also responsible really for the revitalization of the city of London, for the financial industry. She's come under some criticism this morning in some of the accounts for doing that. Do you agree or not?
Well, I'm less familiar with her role in that story, frankly, than I am in some others, so I don't know what role she actually played in that. But I think that if you're on the left and you're looking to somehow diminish Thatcher's influence, I suppose you would try to pin the blame on her for things that happened 20 years after she left power.
She also had a very big impact on the United States. Her close friendship with Ronald Reagan is well known.
And she was a believer, as most British prime ministers are, but not all, in the special relationship, so-called, between the United States and Britain, and she maintained that, and therefore I think, in part because she had an innate appreciation for what's best in the United States, our sense of enterprise, making better of oneself and opportunity, and she understood that coming out of her own middle-class background in Britain. That's very much the American mentality. She was not a prisoner of the British upper classes, which so many British leaders are.
And lots of lessons, I suppose, from her experience and success in that economic revival to our country.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you have to understand that Reagan and Thatcher intellectually faced different countries, different political cultures, but they approach the problems from the same intellectual framework. And that is fundamentally with an overall sense of freedom as the driving force that creates opportunity, that creates wealth, and that their countries had strayed from that in putting too much authority and power on government, and they needed to reclaim that rebirth of freedom, if you will. And I think both Thatcher and Reagan did that in their respective countries.
Time to reclaim the rebirth of freedom. A great lesson. Editorial page editor Paul Gigot, thank you so much for being with us.